On October 9th, 2025, I saw a man hold open the side door of a white meal van while his mother climbed in one careful step at a time. He did not look impatient, and she did not look afraid. That image is why I am still talking about this case. Let me go back to the beginning. I tell this story by tracing two rivers that met in my courtroom. One was the sorrow current, and it began with harm that could not be talked away. The other was the grace current, and it began when people in that same harm chose not to become smaller than themselves. By the time I spoke the sentence, both rivers were running through me at once. Before I keep going, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone tell the full truth about a person and still keep loving them without stepping back? Subscribe if you want to stay with me through this, because that is the kind of room this became, and I want you here when it happens. The victim in this case was Marisol Vega. She was 52 years old, the director of Meadow Ridge Senior Meals in Hartwell, Ohio, and when she walked into my courtroom, she carried herself the way people do when they are tired, but have decided not to hand that tiredness to anyone else. She kept her shoulders level. She set her folder down gently. During the hearing, when Eli Turner's mother dropped a tissue and could not bend fast enough to get it, Marisol picked it up and passed it back without turning it into a moment. That one act told me a great deal. It did not erase what had happened. It did not ask me to forget who had been harmed. It told me only this: pain had entered the room with her, but she had not decided to let pain do all the speaking. The sorrow current began on Friday, February 14, 2025, at 7:42 p.m., behind Faith Lutheran Church at 118 West Monroe Street in Hartwell. A white 2014 Ford Transit van belonging to Meadow Ridge Senior Meals had been left idling for less than 3 minutes while a volunteer carried insulated trays inside. Eli Turner, 27 years old, got into that van and drove away with 23 hot dinners stacked in the back for the night route. He drove 2.8 miles before he ran a stop sign at Monroe and Cherry, clipped a parked Honda Civic, jumped a curb, and slammed the front right corner of the van into the steel access ramp outside Ruiz Family Market. The van could not be driven. The ramp bent inward. 3 meal carriers tipped over, and 2 split open on the floor. 23 seniors who expected dinner that night did not get it on time. At the scene, one officer said Eli told him, "I saw the van said senior meals and I took it anyway." He said it with his hands on the hood of the patrol car. There are sentences that do not need help from tone. That was one of them. When the file first crossed my desk, it was thick in the middle and thin at the edges, which often means the facts came fast and the understanding came slow. I had the police report, the photos, the repair estimate, the route log, and later a presentence investigation report. Most people outside court do not know what that is. It is a report prepared by probation before sentencing, and in plain language, it is the court's way of asking who this person has been when no one was charging them, and who they have been since. The report showed me the legal shape of Eli's life. No prior felonies. 2 misdemeanor disorderly conduct cases from ages 19 and 21. A suspended license tied to unpaid reinstatement fees, not a new dangerous driving offense, part-time warehouse work, spotty attendance, shared address with his mother, Lorraine Turner, age 63. Primary contact person, the same mother whose name would later make the room laugh and then go still. From the bench, I saw Marisol enter before Eli did. That matters. People in the gallery see a room filling. From the bench, I see the order in which courage arrives. Marisol came in looking first at counsel table, not at me, and not at the back doors. She wanted to see where the person who had changed 23 evenings would be sitting. Then she took her seat and folded her hands around a pen she never clicked once. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was around you a few minutes ago has likely fallen back a little. Subscribe. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story, and I want to keep earning it. Eli came in 3 minutes later in a borrowed navy shirt that fit too wide in the shoulders. He was thinner than his intake photo. He walked like a man who knew everyone in the room had a reason to watch him and no reason to trust him. But before he sat down, I saw something that had nothing to do with the charges and everything to do with who he was. His mother's purse had slipped to the floor beside the front row, and he bent, picked it up, set it upright by her shoe, and only then took his seat. That small act did not lower the weight of what he had done. It raised the standard of what I had to do. When a person's full humanity becomes visible in front of me, I cannot sentence a cartoon. I still have to sentence the harm. I just have to sentence the whole person who caused it. Lorraine Turner was there in a gray sweater with one button fastened wrong. She had an oxygen cannula under her nose and a paper envelope in her lap folded soft from being opened too many times. From my bench, I could see that Eli looked for her before he looked for his lawyer. I could also see that Marisol noticed that. The first piece of evidence that established the full weight of what was lost was not the van photo. It was the route sheet for that night. 23 names, 23 addresses, a column marked delivered. On a normal night, those boxes were checked in blue ink as the route went out. On February 14th, every box after 7:40 p.m. was blank. The blankness hit me harder than the metal damage did. A volunteer named Cheryl Boone testified that 2 of the meal recipients were diabetic and 1 had no family within 40 miles. She said, "They wait by the window because the knock is part of supper." That belonged to the sorrow current, not because it was dramatic, because it told me exactly what had been taken. The room changed a little after that. Eli stopped writing on his legal pad. Lorraine took off her glasses and held them in her lap. Marisol kept her eyes on the witness, not on Eli, and that choice carried both pain and restraint in it. Nothing in that room was simple by then. The grace current began with a body camera clip from the first officer on scene. I watched Eli stumble out of the van after the crash. I watched him look at the bent ramp, then at the meal carriers in the back. Before the officer even cuffed him, Eli picked up 3 intact paper bags and set them under the market awning so the rain would not hit them. Then he said, "Can somebody please take these before they go cold?" That did not undo the theft. It did not undo the missed route. But it was real, and it earned its place in the story because nobody told him to do it. Nobody needed him to perform goodness for a camera he likely did not know was filming him. Something in him still turned toward the people he had already failed. A little later, Marisol's own victim statement brought the grace current farther into view. She said, "What he took was not just a van, it was 23 dinners and the trust of people who wait by their windows." I wrote that down under sorrow current. Then she kept going. She said, "If he is going to pay this back, let him pay it back where those people can see him show up." I wrote that under grace current. There was a point in the evidence when the 2 rivers first touched. It came through a witness who was not trying to say anything grand. Cheryl Boone had gone back to the crash site with another volunteer to salvage what meals they could. She said, "He kept asking which bags were still warm." I wrote that down too. Harm was in that sentence. So was care. I did not expect both to fit there, but they did. That was the moment I felt grief and hope at the same time. I am saying it plainly because plain is the only way it sounds true. The legal process kept moving because that is what courts do, even when the people inside them are still catching up. Eli entered guilty pleas to unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, criminal damaging, and driving under suspension. There was no trial after that, but there was still a hearing on sentencing because a plea tells me what happened in law and not yet what to do with the human weight of it. People think the plea is the end of the hard part. Often it is the beginning. There is a legal word most people hear and never use in real life: allocution. It means the defendant's chance to speak before I decide the sentence. I have always thought of it more simply than that. It is the last clean opening before the court turns words into consequences. The defense attorney, Nora Bell, did not pretend Eli had done little. She said the harm was real, the fear was real, and the disruption to the route was real. Then she asked me to look at the reason for the panic. At 7:31 p.m. that night, Lorraine had called Eli 11 times in 14 minutes. Her home oxygen concentrator had failed. She was short of breath, alone, and frightened. Eli had no car, no valid license, and no good options, so he chose a bad one fast. What surprised me was not the legal framing. It was one sentence Nora said after she put the phone records into evidence. She said, "He is her caregiver in all the ways that never make it onto a form." That belonged to the Grace Current, not because it excused him, but because it named something true the paperwork had not held. Still, there were things the defense could not resolve. 23 seniors had gone hungry longer than they should have. A program with tight money had to rent a replacement van for 6 days. A neighborhood market had to rope off an access ramp on a wet February weekend. Panic can explain speed. It cannot repair a bent rail or a missed diabetic meal. Then Eli stood to speak. He looked at me first, then at his mother, then down at the table. He said, "If I'm honest, Your Honor, my mother is part of why I'm here." That line pulled a laugh out of the room before anyone could stop it. Even my clerk looked down hard at her notes. Eli heard the laugh. Lorraine heard it too, and for one strange second she gave a breath that sounded almost like one. Then Eli said, "She raised me to answer when she calls, and I used that as an excuse not to grow up." The room changed right there. The laughter did not disappear. It folded into something sadder and more honest. He kept going. He said, "My mother still leaves the porch light on even when she knows I have a key." That was the Grace Current speaking through a man who had not yet learned how to carry love without leaning on it. I watched Lorraine press her lips together and stare at her hands. Here is what I am offering. The rest of this story told exactly the way I lived it, with nothing cleaned up too early and nothing pushed harder than truth can carry. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. There was a memory from my own life that rose up while Eli was speaking, and I did not invite it. I was 14 years old, standing in my mother's kitchen 3 nights after my father's burial. My older brother came in past midnight with mud on his cuffs and grief all over him, though none of us had language for that yet. My mother did not ask where he had been first. She took the pot off the stove, poured the last of the soup into a bowl, and put a spoon beside it. The loss was already in the room. So was the meal. I place that memory here because it belongs here. I have learned not to argue with the moments that know where they go before I do. When Eli spoke again, he stopped trying to sound clever. He said, "I saw the trays in the back after I hit the curb, and I still kept my foot down." That was the sorrow current, plain and full. Then, a few minutes later, he said the line I wrote down and looked at for a long time after court ended. He said, "She keeps saving a seat for me, and I keep giving her bad news." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. I did not expect that. Lorraine never testified, but she did not need to. The envelope in her lap held pharmacy receipts, oxygen service notices, and a note from her doctor about limited mobility. She came ready to explain herself if asked. What moved me was that Eli did not use her frailty like a shield once the laughter passed. He used it as a mirror. There is a difference, and from the bench it is easier to see than most people know. I just realized, saying that out loud now, that I had never put that difference into words before today. Subscribe. That difference is going to matter more in a few minutes, and I want you with me when it does. By the time I reached sentencing, I had traced both rivers as far as the record would let me. The sorrow current began behind that church van and ran through blank route sheets, bent steel, delayed dinners, and people waiting at dark windows. The grace current began at the crash scene with rescued meal bags, ran through Marisol's statement, through Norabelle's sentence about unseen caregiving, and through Eli's own admission that he had hidden inside his mother's love instead of growing past it. The convergence point came when I understood that the bond between Lorraine and Eli was both part of the pressure that led to the crime and part of the only honest path away from it. That is a hard thing to see clearly. Love had not prevented harm here, but it had not vanished either. I could not punish as if the bond were fake, and I could not forgive as if the harm were small. When the day of sentencing arrived, the room felt steady in the way rooms do when everyone knows the words coming next will travel home with them. Eli sat with both hands flat on the table. Marisol had the same pen. Lorraine had that same envelope, but it was thinner now. I had decided carefully. I had decided knowing that this ruling had to hold the weight of what was lost and also leave room for what might still happen. Those two things do not always fit in the same ruling. In this case, they did. I had made sure they did. I found Eli guilty on the counts before me based on his plea and entered judgment. Then I moved to sentence him, and I did it in the plainest language I could manage because people deserve to understand the moment that changes their days. I said, Mr. Turner, I am ordering you to pay restitution in the amount of $9,180 to Meadow Ridge Senior Meals for van repairs and rental costs, and $1,160 to Ruiz Family Market for the damage to the access ramp. That money is for metal, labor, tires, time, and the route your choice is interrupted. I do not say that to shame you. I say it because repair should be named as exactly as the harm was. I said, I am also ordering 240 hours of community service with Meadow Ridge Senior Meals. At least 160 of those hours must be on the morning or evening delivery routes, and at least 40 must be spent loading and cleaning the meal carriers you left on the road. I am ordering that because the people affected by this case were not abstract. They were waiting at doors and windows, and I want your effort to reach the same places your panic reached. I said, I am also ordering you to complete a 20-week caregiver boundary and decision-making program approved by probation, and I am ordering you to submit a lawful driver reinstatement plan within 60 days. The evidence showed me a man who moves fast when fear rises and plans late when planning matters most. That can be learned differently. This requirement is not here to decorate the sentence. It is here because you will keep failing your mother and other people until you know how to help without grabbing the nearest wrong thing. Then I paused, and I remember that pause in my hands. My left thumb was pressed against the edge of the bench hard enough to leave a mark. I looked at Eli, then at Lorraine, then at Marisol, and I said, and there is one more thing. For the first 6 months of this sentence, on the first Wednesday of each month at 6 p.m., you will attend a 90-minute accountability meeting with your probation officer, Ms. Vega, if she chooses to attend, and your mother if she chooses to attend. You will report what you worked, what you paid, what you avoided, and what you did when panic returned. I am ordering that because too much of this case grew in silence and rescue. Accountability must now happen in the company of other people. Then I gave him the condition for early completion. I said, if after 12 months you have completed the counseling, restored your license lawfully, paid at least 80% of restitution, and made 52 on-time meal deliveries with no violations, I will consider ending the final 6 months of supervision early. One good speech does not tell me enough. A year of ordinary follow-through does. After I imposed the sentence, I looked at Eli and said what I needed him to hear from me, and not only from the paperwork. I said, what you did was take a vehicle that was carrying dinner to people who count on that knock, and you turned your own fear into their delay. For the people harmed by that, this court sees the small, exact burden your choice placed on their evening and on the people who served them. Then I said, Mr. Turner, the charges tell me what you did. They do not tell me that at the crash scene you asked whether the meals were still warm, and they do not tell me that you know exactly how long your mother's love has been carrying more than it should. That does not excuse you. It tells me what kind of work might still reach you. Then I looked out at the room and said, for everyone here, love is not a defense to harm, but it can be part of the repair if the truth is allowed to stand beside it. And the last sentence of my speech was for no one person and for all of them. I said, mercy that ignores damage is thin, and punishment that ignores people is blind. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect, because I have never said that last sentence out loud outside a courtroom, and I need a second with it. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay. All right, let me keep going. After I finished, nobody moved right away. That is often how I know the words landed where they needed to land. Eli nodded once, not dramatically, just once, like a man accepting that the road home would now be measured in repeated things. Marisol let out a breath and uncapped her pen for the first time all morning, though she did not write. As the courtroom began to empty, I stayed seated and watched what people do when formal words end and private ones begin. Lorraine stood slowly. Eli reached for her elbow, and she let him help her, but only for the first step. Then she crossed the aisle to Marisol. From where I sat, I heard Lorraine say, I'm sorry he made your people wait by the window. Marisol put one hand over Lorraine's fingers and said, "Bring him Monday. If he's going to fix this, he should see the route before sunrise." That was the second victim quote I have carried ever since, and it belonged to the grace current without denying the first. Before I stood up, I did one small thing. I laid my sentencing notes flat with both palms and smoothed the page once. I do not know why that was the action my body chose, except that it came from the same place in me where both rivers had finally stopped fighting each other. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom, and you just heard what Marisol said after it was over. Hold both of those things. Subscribe before we go further, because what happened after that is the part of this case that has stayed with me the longest. Subscribe now. On Monday, February 17th, 2025, at 5:28 a.m., Eli reported to Faith Lutheran for his first route shift. I know that because probation later noted the exact time, and Marisol mentioned it again in a status letter. She also noted that he was early by 12 minutes and that he spent most of the first morning learning who needed soft bread, who preferred decaf, and which front porch step leaned to the left. Months later, on October 9, 2025, I was at the same church for a community breakfast before a school mentoring event. I arrived early, and there was that white van. Eli stood by the side door holding it open while Lorraine climbed in with a route clipboard against her chest. One name on that clipboard had been crossed through since April, after a woman on the route named Dorothy Lang passed away. The loss was still on the page. So was the work. There was an appeal. Eli challenged the monthly accountability meetings and argued that requiring his mother's optional attendance reached too far into family life. The 7th District Court of Appeals affirmed the sentence on March 3, 2026. In plain language, they said the conditions fit the facts of the case, the needs shown in the record, and the court's duty to protect the public while encouraging repair. It took a little over 7 months from notice to decision. When I read it, I did not feel proved right. I felt relieved that the law had room for what I had tried to do. This case showed me something I am still working out. Holding two feelings at once is not always confusion. Sometimes it is accuracy. In my work, I have seen many people ask the court to choose one clean story. All damage or all promise, all anger or all softness, all ending or all beginning. Life does not often come to the bench that way. I have never said this in any other professional setting, and I mean that exactly. There are cases where I am not only deciding what sentence the law allows, I am also deciding whether I still believe a person can become trustworthy in the place where they once caused harm. This was one of those cases. If you know the sorrow current in this story because you have been the one waiting, the one whose ordinary day got bent by somebody else's bad choice, I want to speak to you carefully. I saw that feeling in Marisol's face the first time she looked toward defense table. I also saw that over the course of the proceedings, the harm did not erase her steadiness, her clarity, or her willingness to ask for repair instead of only distance. That mattered to me. It still does. And if you know yourself in Eli's chair, if you have made a real choice that caused real harm and now live with the question of what comes next, here is what I have observed after years on the bench. The people who move towards something better stop spending all their words on why they did it and start giving some of their days to repairing it. They accept boring accountability. They show up on wet mornings. They do not ask one good apology to do the work of a changed pattern. If I could say one thing to every person in that chair, it would be this: do the next plain thing that costs you something and helps somebody else. On October 9, 2025, I saw Eli hold the side door of a white meal van while Lorraine climbed in one careful step at a time. He did not look impatient, and she did not look afraid. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe and stay. Use the comments the way that meal route worked at its best, as a place where people willing to tell the truth about harm and still leave room for grace can find each other.